Today we're here with Jack Algiere. And Jack, we cannot thank you enough for being on the podcast and for just being such an incredible human. Jack has been actively farming for more than 2 decades and has trained a generation of young farmers in organic and biodynamic farming practices. He oversees the extensive farming operations at the Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture, integrating a holistic farm team that works together on multi-species grass-fed livestock, grains, field crops, greenhouse, fruit, flowers, wild landscapes, and compost in a 4-season regenerative system. At Stone Barns, Jack leads programming in innovative tool design, breeding, and monitoring work that supports the efforts of small and mid-sized farmers, and was part of the core team that developed the Conservation Action Plan that led to Stone Barns' management of 350 acres of public lands in the Rockefeller State Park Preserve. He is a frequent public speaker and has appeared at numerous food and farming conferences and summits across the country. He holds a BS in horticulture from the University of Rhode Island, and you have done a number of other things as well. And you know, Jack, I am always so just enthralled with you and your work, not from the external work that you do, but also from internally who you are, which is what I always find fascinating in people, that people like you that really care about something more, something other that you've devoted your life to. And so I'd like to just ask you, you know, where did that come from? What was your upbringing? And what kind of led you into being this person that you are and doing the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I always love to start by remembering all my family and you know, where I came from. It's always important for anything that we do to remember the root, you know.
Yes.
And also just want to say thank you for inviting me to this. It's been great to know you and to have had a lot of different experiences knowing you in different places around lots of farmers and great thinkers. So that's part of why I stay so positive. So I grew up in Rhode Island. I went to the University of Rhode Island for school, but when I was young, our family farm was pretty close to the ocean in southern Rhode Island. When you're from Rhode Island, you can say northern and southern Rhode Island. It makes sense. The rest of the world sort of looks crooked at you, like Rhode Island has a south, but it does. That's where the beaches are, and the sandy soils and all that. So our family, both of my parents worked, a very loving family. My parents worked off the farm, but we kept this homestead. So growing up with the Rodale books and all these old, most of my father's Italian-Irish, and he had a lot of family recipes for gardens, all kinds of composts, manures, and you know, different things. And so it was always that part of my growing up was on the farm with goats and pigs and chickens and gardens and that kind of thing. And our neighbors also, we had a big family and a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles and godparents and that whole thing in our community. And so there were a couple adjacent farms to us, and there was, we had a sauna culture. I would attribute some of my open community relation to sauna culture, which is awfully good at, you know, grounding people and such a healthy thing to do. So that went on. That was my youth. It's like growing up in that, being in the ocean, being at the farm, being with a lot of family, and then, you know, I worked early. I got a job really young, 12 years old. I was looking recently at my income tax, Social Security. I think the first time I received Social Security, I think I was 12 years old when I started doing that, and I stuck with it. It's really surprising to look back and be like, wow, I made $1,000 when I was 12.
It's a lot of money for a 12-year-old.
I bought a bike. I did a number of things, you know. It's like, my father is an incredible mechanic and builder. My mother is, she runs patents and grants for university, and also just a great gardener and a lover of plants and nature. And so I kind of got both sides of that world, which I think attributed to the agricultural piece, because I had a strong mechanical background and a very deep love of nature, which is that was the piece there. Those were two important pieces. The third piece didn't arise for me until much later, and my family, my parents separated when I was later on in my teenage years, and we sold the farm. And you know, it was sad. It was a very sad moment, you know, and it was this moment of realization that the impermanence of things. And, you know, I think some of that had to do, interestingly enough, in the 80s, especially when there was so much of an agricultural breakdown, where all these box stores were coming into towns, and the main street and the towns themselves were losing their identity to this homogeny that exists out there. So the value sets of these homesteads and small farms and sort of things like that were discounted. And we were certainly being fed a story, an oversimplified kind of storybook about what our food system was like, what it was actually doing, what nutrition was like, and it was a, you know, if we look back in history, I think it was a peak of what needed to be an awareness that came from that, you know. So I decided I was also playing drums a lot. I was playing a lot of music, and I had not expected to go to school for farming or agriculture or, you know, science or anything like that. I was expecting to go to school for music, as any, you know, respectable farm boy might want to do, not be a farmer. So, but the loss of the farm was an eye-opener for me. It was more about the loss of relationship to this piece of land, this place that I had a relationship to, and this eye-opening moment at 17, 18 years old, where I was working in these greenhouses, and there was a huge amount of chemical use, and the farmers themselves that were there were getting ill from the chemicals they had been using. And there was a kind of defeatism that they had about, well, the old days we used to do it like this, but now we have to do it like this, because that's what the customer wants, and we're competing against this box mentality, and all this stuff is there. So all the social and ecological ethics were out the window for the sake of this product sale. And everything that it was built on, the whole culture of the place was being sold out to the pace and price. And so I decided to go to school for plant science. And I started to work at a local biodynamic farm, and started to run a greenhouse organically at the University of Rhode Island for the botany department. I worked for the botany department. I did some landscaping. I was working like an animal to pay for college, but also just to keep myself busy mostly. So it's been the interest there is to do what I love to do. And in that time frame, you know, as when you're in college, you're really learning about what it means to learn, what it means to be able to capture rather than be fed something. And so it took me a little bit of time to navigate that for myself. And my wife, Shannon, who we had been dating since through college, she and I moved to Costa Rica to kind of break away from what we had been learning about. To be honest, from my perspective, I think in general, I felt there was a certain kind of betrayal, a societal betrayal of like, why didn't you tell us that this wasn't good for us to eat, or this was happening to the planet because people were trying to do good? or we're cutting corners or something like that. It would have been good to have learned that in school, or have that story be told honestly through product or whatever. So long way around, just realizing that actually wasn't just about growing plants and being connected to nature and having that mechanical edge. It was actually about the social justice of it. It was about actually feeding communities. And to be honest, I would say what I carry right now is the same thing that I felt then, which was, if we can't do this together, we can't do it.
Yes.
Right? This is not about self-sufficiency. And I've been trusting that. And I'm continually trusting more of that, that together is how we do this. And together is more complicated and more complex and more annoying and more satisfying and all of that stuff together. And that's why I love this role in the food system, to actually do that. Now, my role then was get in there in the trench and just dig and grow and feed. And it was a very simple idea. I had a lot of different people work with me over the years, and what I've learned to do now is delegate, how to let go of people making those little choices, how to let go of emotional attachment to decisions, and how to hold on to principles.
Yeah.
Because this work is a practice, it's not a prescription. It's something that always changes, and I'll always be wrong and I'll always be right. And the more I understand that, the more I laugh at the team in their frustration, which makes them really more angry in the moment. But I think they get it. I think they get my role is to remind them of that. And if there's ever one thing that I actually do get upset about, is when people are too selfish about that feeling, and are not cognizant of each other. Because the team has to work like that. I mean, that's kind of the deal. It's like, if we want to see holistic change in our food system, and we want to see the equity, and we want to see the story in its full light, we have to have a little humility, and just try to work together. And that's kind of the meditation.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. And you describe it so well. And what I find is interesting is your background as a musician also. When we look at harmony, like what you're saying too, how do we bring people together to work together, to put solution into place? And when we see harmony within ourselves, within each other, within our soil system, our environmental system, that it's very relational, exactly like what you're saying. And then this beautiful harmony that plays out when we can do that together, almost like this great symphony.
Right. Yeah, I like to, the symphony is a wonderful way to look at it. Often it feels like jazz, because of the soloists, because of the improvisation that happens. But I use this metaphor a fair amount with the team, is that everybody's playing a different instrument, but we're all playing the same music. This is the song. This is our song today, right? And we play that song, and nobody's going to solo until we're jamming, until that thing is up on a level. And then at that point, it's all about support the soloist. And your turn will come, right? It's a given. That's how it goes. Saxophone, trombone, drummer, blah, 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 right? But you have to be there. You have to be at that place So that, yeah, the music has always played a big part of that. And again, as a drummer, the timekeeper role has always been a big part of that with the group, because it's about setting that. Um, it's just about setting that pace for everybody to kind of stick with.
How do you think we do that in the world as a whole, or perhaps even in the United States as a whole? You know, you and I have spoken quite a bit of how do we keep people connected so that this, you know, there's these people all over. Let's just even bring the United States as an example, that are doing this incredible work where we can solve these issues that we're faced with in food supply. How do you think we bring people together to work together, to have an understanding of what each other is doing, exactly like what you're describing? So when the soloists step up, but we're doing it together, what do you think we might do to help make that happen?
In a word, integrate is a big one. Reminds me of something Fred Kirschman wrote that I saw kind of recently. You know, we were just celebrating something for him, and I was reading through a book of the Cultivating an Ecological Conscience, which is such a wonderful set of essays.
Yes.
And he was talking about agriculture as the purpose of agriculture was to develop a refinement of nature. Yeah. And that refinement is where it's all at, right? It's not about making it faster and cheaper and easier. It's about refining our relationship to it. And in that refinement, there's all kinds of beauty, there's all kinds of deliciousness, there's all kinds of wonder. But we need to get up to that. We need to get back to those sets of values. And, you know, it's hard for me to think how you solve a national problem. But I think the way to solve for that is to see a pattern spread. That the pattern in a small, you know, it's like it's a green zone. You know, it starts in this one place, it's working, and then it spreads because of a couple of reasons. One, because of it's adopted through observation, but it's also sort of osmotic, you know, or meiotic. It splits and does its thing because a person was in this environment and they were able to practice with all of those stakeholder pieces, not just one or two, but all together. And when you have an environment, when you have a nurtured environment like that actually supports that food system, which for the fact is that there are lots of those, but they're small. And they're not mainstream, so they feel very much like non-existent or you know, not scalable, because they're not scalable. They're actually not scalable. That's kind of the point, right? Is that it has, because it works at that size. Actually, it's funny. You always think about how anthropologists look at the spread of humans across the planet early on. And there are these 30-year cycles because the population grows too big for that one community to stay together. So a bunch of people leave and they walk 30 miles away and they start the next thing. You know, and that's kind of the gig. It's like, I'm just far enough away from you guys to really do this thing. So that, to me, is that hub and shed, which we know, the fiber sheds and food hubs and all of these things that are developing across this country right now are sort of harken back to the old granges and the community centers, but much more inclusive and much more global thinking, you know, environmentally and socially speaking. So there is a different framework, and it's the equity is there for the farmer to the artisan to the culinary experts, chefs, to the home consumer, right? And that there's this through line, that the story the ethic, the social value, the ecology is not only retained and interpreted, but actually, celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
And that, unfortunately, it's has a stigma of more expensive and more elite to go organic or to do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true in the sort of half step out of industry. To think of what we did with organic, it's not different farming. It's just a set of rules that say let's not use these things. The real root of organic and regenerative, I was thinking this while you were saying, reading my bio, and I was thinking, whenever I write those things, I'm like, I wish I just had like one word I could just say that, raising animals and diversified vegetables and fruit and compost, it's like, that should be one word, because actually it's one thing. It's being like, I'm a guy, I have a liver and a heart. And
Yes, it's a whole system.
like, it's a system.
Yeah.
And that's what regenerative systems are. But what we call organic, as an example, is an industrial model, an industrial institution that does not subscribe to lots of synthetics and things like that. And it's a good baseline.
Mm-hmm.
But because the rest of our culture has not necessarily shifted around it, it's become exclusionary in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, the way to get closer to solving for that, partially it comes with consumer awareness about what's really out there. So because I think that, the reality is people want to do good when they know more about something. They want to make the better choice.
Mm-hmm.
And they should be looking at food as an institution, like as, you wouldn't question giving to conservation, as an example. To give to food feels like, wait, I'm just paying for food. I'm just paying to eat it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've made this disconnection between conservation and recreation and food and space and all time and all that stuff. But to that point, if we want to bring it together, you bring the chef back in, you bring the artisans back in, you bring the farmer into the equity of the arts, the products, the refinement of the products, which were not separated before. In our initial 10,000 years of agriculture, it was about refining the situation, getting it to this place. And all of the arts came out of that, developed from this relationship in nature and our relationship to these sort of cardinal art forms, which there are so many, but a lot of those natural art forms are being lost, even to the extent of things like butchery and baking, with leather craft, or all of these things that we take because we look at a hamburger and IKEA furniture as kind of the same thing. It's like, it's just a thing that we need, and not the thing that's actually stabilizing our communities.
Yes.
And that's what needs to change, and that can change, but it will take a collective decision, because it's not a thing that works in a parade. It works together. The stakeholders agree that we're going to do this. That's the very complicated thing. But I think it comes, if we trust democracy, if we trust that we have a voice as people, that even in a capitalist system as we're in, our voice will change the way that big ag works. If we don't, I'm not in any way Luddite to the extent that I would prefer there be no big agriculture. I would just prefer big agriculture was conscious about the effect that they had on the planet, and stop using that excuse that they're feeding the world.
Right.
And that's the cost that it comes at, because that's not reality. And it's a shareholder issue. And we're getting there. We see that horizon, right? We
Yes.
see that already.
Absolutely. And you were so gracious to be in a film we're doing called The Reverence of Life, which is really bringing into the consciousness of people, or just the thought of these things, how precious life is. And that the reverence of life is when we care about life. We care about things, exactly like what you're saying, that hamburger came from a living animal. These things are precious. How our internal systems affect environmental systems, and that there's these things that support life and then certain things that destroy life. And it's almost just bringing back this more heart-centered consciousness to care, and to care at every single level. Because to me, there seems to be no reason why we can't feed a growing population really great, healthy, good food, and in ways that, what I love about regenerative systems are that output exceeds input. So that when we're doing these things in a way that really work, there's plenty. And it's bringing back those relationships and that connection and what these things mean. So it seems as though part of it is to just continue to bring this message and to kind of shift people in the way that they think, and to let them know that they have a huge impact. Like every single person individually has an impact, not only in their small communities, but as a whole.
Such an important thing to want to perpetuate in all our community is the essentialness of everyone, and that they can impact things in a positive way. I think that's one of the things, is that and I've done this long enough to see a solid generation of people kind of come through, and what's surprising to me is that there's the increased amount of fear of touching nature.
Yes.
As if we shouldn't touch it, because like every time we touch it, we break it. Right? So just step back, and that is, it's an interesting perspective, because I'm a huge believer in maturation in nature, that you grow as a human being, and we mature at this life pace, but we have a relationship with other. I mean, just the same way you can have social maturity, you can have a maturation to nature. And when that level societally keeps going down, I mean, my guess is that we're somewhere around maybe 8 or 9 years old societally for our relationship with nature. And I'd say that just because we appreciate it from a recreational standpoint. We like to be in it. It's very relaxing. We don't necessarily fully understand our impact in it. And when we get a little bit further and we see a little bit more, it seems really big and scary. Right? And that's this idea. It's so funny that's like that, because not everyone, I think the more time you spend, getting stuck in a rainstorm or watching plants germinate under the moon, or, what are these things that happen, the more you're making a personal relationship and growing as an individual in this space. Yeah. And so I'm not scared of that. And that was something, I actually think that for us to work on this planet, we need to be mutualists. And for us to be mutualists, we need to mature our relationship to it. And that takes contact. That's the only way to do it. Someone asked me, actually it was interesting, it was an interview not that long ago. I forget how somebody brought it up to me, but they said, we keep hearing you say something they had heard. I'm not sure mistakenly or not, but they had said, we keep hearing this idea of, can you explain what an intact food system is? And I'm not sure I ever said that necessarily but I thought the term was really interesting. And in the moment of the interview, I thought, well, it's such an interesting word, this idea of intact. It's like in contact. It's like in relation with, like a whole relation to.
Yeah.
So the intact nature of it is its wholeness in one way, like made it, I'm intact. But the other one is intact, like in contact. And I just thought it was just like struck me, because if you're going to use that in terms of like what an intact food system is, it's one that everyone has contact to. Because how can it be alive and grow if you're not in that first degree of separation, right? At least at some point, let it be a potted basil in your window.
Yeah.
Let it be the rice you cook on your stove. But it is the wellspring of creative arts and innovation. Right? It really is. And those are generative arts. Those are generative arts that come out of a relationship to something other than just people. Because people are great natured too. No, don't get me wrong. We just have more ego.
Yes. Yes.
And
But-
kind of speaking on consumer education, I'm really passionate about consumer education and food justice, and I love everything you're saying. I'm trying to digest it all because you're so eloquent with your words on this issue. But I think, a lot of people, especially my generation, are filtering through a lot of negative information every day about climate change, about food systems. And so people really want to know, what can I do? What are actions I can take every day to make a positive impact? And so I guess I just want to know what your thoughts are on what are some of those choices that we can make to engage more with nature, to engage more with our food systems, to evoke that reverence of life, to evoke action.
Yeah, well, a couple easy things, I think, is just get outside.
Yeah.
Enjoy the change in the weather. I've learned to not complain about the weather. It never serves me well. My relationship with nature is like, no, that's not going to help. It's that's a big piece. It's like, because the more you're in it, sometimes I think about like just everything is out in it all the time except us.
Yes.
Yes. And that's what we're not a part of. We sort of want to exclude ourselves from this thing that it's like, again, back to being childish. It's like when you're little, you're like, I'm not playing with you. You were mean.
Right. Yes, exactly. You're too hot today. It's very
too hot for me. I'm out of here. I'm going to Mars.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
There's too much of that attitude
right
going around.
That is, we could do a 1 hour podcast
Yeah,
on that
good.
in and of itself.
So I would say, food choices, health choices, just in general, recognize that your walk. I'll bring Shannon into this again. My wife is a huge fan of the digestive stroll, she calls it. She's a great exerciser, but she is known. I have two sons. I have 13 and 16-year-old sons, and they know that every time, as soon as we're done, the digestive stroll is coming, and they're like, oh. No matter where we are or what's happening, and it's a very, very good habit.
Could you explain that a little more? The digestive stroll.
Yeah, I like that term.
It's just a walk after you eat. Pretty much any time you eat, this like part of your food is that you eat and then you walk, and that's kind of the thing. And it's just like the feeling of like eat and then lie down. Because it sets a new pattern, and I'll just use that as the example. It's a pattern of levity. It's not a pattern of filling up something. We're not filling up. Right? We're energizing themselves. And so the choice to let it all just like settle in, we're going to do all this work. And, this feeling of like, well, don't swim for half an hour. Okay, maybe don't swim. Whatever. You can certainly walk. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have, it's not about an exercise regime or anything. It's about, that's what I like about it, because exercise is great and all this, but actually, I never really quite thought about it like this, but I'll say it. In plant physiology and evolution, and probably in animals too, but just I studied a lot of plant physiology and plant evolution, that sort of thing. And what's so beautiful about it mechanically is that all of evolution, all as the 500 million year old mosses and to today's plants, what keeps happening is the mechanism keeps getting more nuanced and more simple and efficient. Like, it's just better. It's like, it literally is improving as time goes on. Like, not necessarily sometimes more complex, but not necessarily, just like a great idea after a great idea. And it's responding to all these things. It's the beauty about nature, is that about the plant world, is that there are plants here from way before the dinosaurs, the same way there's like very modern things happening. And so you get this sort of history. But the beauty of that is, and I guess to tie it back to the walking, is that we have this tendency to overdo it all the time. Yeah. Overeat, overdrink, over socialize, overwork, oversleep. You know what I mean? All of these things kind of play in. And so that's the thing about balancing these things, is that, we ought to be lighter on ourselves in that way. It is actually evolutionarily modern to be kind to yourself.
Yes. Yes.
It's a good place to start. And then, eating habits might change, your general lifestyle change. The fact that eating and lifestyle is looked at as different is kind of crazy. That thing is like, where are we evolving to in this way? And so that would be what I would say, is that don't be so hard on yourselves.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And the other way to say that is to be more gentle.
Yeah.
And don't take yourself too seriously.
Yes.
But the other part of that is really about just cultivating healthy habits and those sort of things. And I think a lot of the stuff around diet and health, again, this would be why you would want to go for a walk, is that it connects you. It's so non-linear. Go for a walk and something different happens to you. You don't know, but you made a different choice when you return. It's just steps. It's hard to tie them all together and say, well, when you're all upset in a moment about something, if you don't take a break, you can make a really bad choice.
Yes.
And so that's kind of the same thing. And I see that over and over again with the work on the farm here. So there's that part of it. It's just like, take a minute. The other is just to be in contact with it, because again, back to diet, back to conservation, back to all these different things that we hear about we're supposed to be doing, the sort of PC choice of what to do. Because it's really hard to get back to a place that says, is this right for me? Does this really feel that right? And get back to what I mentioned earlier. You have to find the beauty, and you have to find the deliciousness, and you have to find the wonder in it. That is the only way for it to be sustainable. You can be scared out of your mind about how we're running this place into the ground, but that can only happen for a minute, and then you have to find the beauty. because there's no sustainability in fear.
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It can be crippling if you let
Absolutely.
it sit.
Yeah. Paralyzing.
Right. And that to your point, that younger generations, that we've been drilling this in. When I talked to my 16-year-old, said he's like, there's a lot of stuff out there. It's not encouraging. You know what I mean? It's not encouraging
Yes.
situation.
Yeah.
And now he's in the age where I remember that moment of realization. I think to myself, like, yeah, what do you see? What do you see in this moment? Like, where's your line? Where is the place where you can be you in this world? And because, like, that's the biggest thing. Find their own self-empowerment in those places in that way, so that we can do good. And that comes from being grounded and connected, and having a sense for it. And the diet, again, is a big one, because there's so much conscience around, well, I don't know what's right. And then you're relying on others to tell you what's right. And not to say that there isn't good advice out there, but I think it's more than just the menu.
Yes.
That's kind of the point. It's just the whole life and that whole thing, and then let that be inspiring. Let that spark curiosity about what this thing is and where it came from and what it's doing for me, and and then it's really interesting to eat and not utility.
That's a great
and the shame too. That's the other thing, and that the fact that
yes,
carry the shame is probably the most unhealthy thing that we do to ourselves.
Two things you touched upon. One, that word inspiring, but also the support of young people. I know you've worked a great deal with young people, and like you, that's one of the things that I think is just so important, that people that are our age, really step in and not only work with young people, but support them and encourage them in very practical ways. I know that, one of the reasons I wanted to, Taylor to come be close to me, you're 25 years old, and is just this incredible energy to serve the world, and so to be able to come in and, and we to mentor and to support and say, there's so much hope here. And so I know you've worked with a lot of young people too. And to me, I see so much hope coming from the young people, that they really want to make a difference and they want to know how. And then for some of us that are older, it is our responsibility to teach and to help and to support in all ways. And so you have worked with young farmers for a long time, and obviously, but that how important that is. And so how is it for you working with young people, and what do you think is the best thing that we can do for young people today?
Well, I think it has been an incredible learning experience to work with this whole set of people that are really looking for social change. The point of this is it's a revolution. I mean, they're really not. They're maybe here kind of growing food, but like I had said, it's a social contract. It's kind of a service. Is that we're going to grow food for the community. That's a good thing to do. Yeah. So it's a fairly simple idea. I want to be a farmer in this way. It's not the same kind of farming as, like, we have tractors and stuff, and we're definitely running a good sized farm here, but comparatively, 500 different crops growing right now. 8 different species of animals. There's a lot going on, and everybody that's in here is like, learning about all these different channels of things. And so my role is to maintain the whole vision. It's this very simple set of principles that are guiding the choices that are really there to guide. And that way it keeps me from micromanaging because they need to make mistakes on their own. And there needs to be a lot of ownership of that level of choice. Because you can really literally bury yourself. Like
Yes.
you know, the work is tremendous, and the time management and the assessment of the tasks and the timing are incredibly important in this work. It's not just like, when do we plant the corn? We are running successions where, you know, some of those 500 varieties of crops are being planted 20 times in a year.
Yeah.
You know, we're following lunar cycles. We're learning about how to connect to the celestial plane.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all this stuff. I'm like, reconnect. This is the way to connect. And this is one of the last bastions of relations of nature that actually matters for the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great place to study that.
Yes.
Because you're growing food, but you're stewarding land. You're working in nature. Elliot Coleman, another one of my teachers, said, we're junior partners to nature.
Oh,
This idea that, like,
great.
it doesn't matter how much you think you're in control. There's, you know, the boss says, this is what's happening today.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what we're going to do. And
Love
so it's
that.
like, all right, good. All right, great. So that's a practice. That's a strong practice. The
Mm-hmm.
humility of that no one is the supreme, that everybody has an altitude. I fly, the altitude that I have to fly at, that I realize that is the value for this team, is
Mm-hmm.
that I know I should stay at that altitude until they need me.
Yes.
Right? And that's part of the vision, that sort of hawk vision, is that I'm there and I can come down and I'm aware. And if there's one thing that I feel very proud of, that really comes back, that I'm always like, oh yeah, I do that. Is that I show up at the right time.
Yes.
I show up. I show up when they're making the biggest mistakes.
Yes.
And I show up when they are in the middle of the most strenuous anxiety moments. And I show up when in the middle of the night sometimes, you know. And it's just whatever it needs to happen. I mean, there's animals loose or some crop that, you know. I guess I come in to calm the team, remind
Yes.
them of a bigger picture, to let them know that, again, it's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
You're practicing this.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to just try to forget what just happened. You actually want to remember it.
Yes.
You want to remember every bit of it. And because that's what will make it better. So that's one thing that I really love about working with them. I can remember, you know, when I was in my early 20s, knowing that I was already so on this path. You know, I showed up here at Stone Barns when I was 27. Which I just can't even believe, the trust in the people that were around me. So I looked to my mentors and said that there's nothing like the kind of confidence they gave me. They had way more confidence than I had in myself to do things. They were just like, go, me go, Bob. You know, just the things that he was comfortable with me doing. I still can't even believe it. And, you know, it was such a great thing. I grew so much from the mistakes I made in those moments. And I think it's a very valuable thing to not be coddled in that way. And so, you know, coming into this space, I can only hope to repay that, you know, through the legacy of this, is that we're sharing information. And sometimes it's really serious and deep. And sometimes it's just letting go. Like, just like much lighter and much less of a thing than you think it is. And so I love working with them. And I think that in agriculture and the same in cooking, for that matter. I actually think that, the chefs do the same thing. They're of the same cloth in some ways, because they're trying to make change in their communities. The good, conscious chefs that are out there, which there are so many great cooks and chefs that got into food, the same way that they may have just as well gotten into farming. I can't tell the difference. I get both all the time in the same place here, and they're mixing all the time. So what's cool is that they think they're going to want to be a chef forever. They think they want to be a farmer forever, and they end up being a leathersmith, or they end up being a florist, or they end up being a butcher. We don't know what they're going to become, but the reality is, like, there's all kinds of art, there's all kinds of crafts and mastery to actually be able to find your niche in the system. And farming is a good, easy way in. I think it's a lot less painful than entering through the culinary side of things. But that's just my opinion.
Yes.
I'm glad I entered the farm side. It's hard in the kitchen. I see a lot of that.
Very hard.
For all the cooks who are listening, you know exactly what I mean. Late nights and all that. This team, they're bare of the heat and everything and the cold and all that, but they get to have that 6 a.m. morning and the sunrise, and they get to have the open space and the vision, the long vista, and the space between each other. When things get really intense, you can actually literally be a half mile away from somebody.
Yes, you're right.
It's good. It's healthy.
Jack, a couple of years ago, we were at a conference together, and you said something that I thought was so powerful, and I don't recall exactly how you said it, but you were talking about, at some point in your life, you realized what needed to be done in food systems or in the world, and that you really felt the enormity of that, and in some ways a bit of the burden of that. And the way I took that is that sometimes we really realize that something is needed, and it's not this thing about let's save the world, it's really this thing of, wow, I am aware of something that's needed, and that no matter what I do or what my age is or however life unfolds, that I'm committed to that. I'm committed to that something other. Do you recall saying that?
I do. I very much remember that time. They're just stages, right? There's stages of acknowledgement, and I think it's important. It's like, again, it happens at all times of our life. It's like this idea. The first one is like realization of what's happening is bigger than I thought it was. Which probably happened to me during my first year or so in college, when I was just like, oh, this is what's perpetuating that?
Yes.
And then the response to it was, yeah, let's fight this. And I was like, it was kind of the first fight was pretty short. It was just like, wait a second, this is crazy. Why would I do this to myself?
Yes.
I'm out of here.
Right.
So it's like, bail, Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Right? So that was the idea, and we literally took off for a year. We went to work for the Park Services, and we lived in the jungle. It's incredibly, it's just like we had very little, and so happy to be, in some way, feel like we had gotten away from it. First of all, an illusion. But again, still part of the phases of process there. And it was actually the time in living in those spaces, living in places, remote places, where I just kept having conversations with different people. I would spend all this time in the jungle and in the forests where we were in the rainforest, and then would come out and sort of have to go into town or do something to connect. And everybody I would connect with would keep saying, oh, you're so lucky you're from the United States, and I just really want to go to Chicago. I'd love to bring my mother a refrigerator, and like it was so much of that tradition, the rut of poverty, the rut of peasantry, or however you want to say it. And the older generation was sort of okay with it. It was the younger generation that was like tempted by Coca-Cola and chips and all this stuff to want to find out where the source of all that was coming from, because that seemed very shiny, and that's what they wanted. And I was like, dude, you live in a paradise.
Yeah.
This is incredible. Like, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're how could you even talk like that? And I thought, all right, wow, it's interesting. So, I would in not so direct conversations that kept coming back to me. It's really interesting thread here that I didn't expect to be getting in this moment, right? Yeah. But the kicker was, I was in this forest. This is actually, it sounds like a dream, but it feels like a dream to even say. This was real. This is a real thing. So we're in this forest. It's an absolute preserve in Costa Rica. No science, no people. You can only have 3 people at a time in this forest, and we were 3 in that space in this little hut. And we had to walk out of it. It took us a day to get out to get a bag of food and come back. Very remote. And we're out in this space, and it's coastal. It's at sort of the bottom of the Nicoya Peninsula. And
a blue zone.
Yeah, awesome. And so we're way out there, and I'm walking down. There was this boundary, these rivers, these creeks that came around and sort of boundaried the property lines. And the only real job I had was to make sure that those trails stayed open. And so I was sort of macheteing my way down these trails to keep them open, and was walking down the stream bed. And there's these hoverflies flying all around. And when they zip in front of you, and as you're walking, they sort of go backwards and stay with you. And my eyes kept going to it. So I'm walking down this like jet black stream bed, clear water, black, like obsidian kind of creek, and this thing is flying in front of me, and I'm like totally out of it. And I see this motion in a tree kind of next to me, and it's this panther that comes down this tree and like smoothly kind of right through the forest, and the whole time he's like watching me in this stream bed, and I'm just like, I was just like out in the breeze. I felt so vulnerable in front of this thing. And I was like, oh my God, what kind of, you just gave me this message, like, like, what are you doing?
Yes, exactly.
Right? So,
right.
And so I was like, what? It left, I was fine. I was like, what is happening? I walked down the stream bed, and then the rocks started to sort of turn colorful, like yellow, red, purple. And then, they're big boulders. And as I got closer to the beach, the rocks got smaller and got to the beach itself. And there were these 2 black outcroppings, volcanic outcropping. And the beach itself, all the stone was like this tiny pebble, like rainbow pebble of sort of undulating out into this clear water between this. It's like magical place. And I was like, wow. I sit on this rock and I'm looking out of this thing, and the thought that came through my mind was, I gotta get the hell out of here.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Like what am I doing? Why am I trying to hide from this thing in my life? Why would I hide from this? I know what the problem is. I'm listening to all this stuff, and I'm hiding out here. And so I just thought, let's get into it. Let's get back to it, and it's ours.
Yeah,
it's ours.
Yeah,
that's all. That totally shifted my frame of mind. That day shifted my mind. It was probably maybe New Year's, somewhere around New Year's 95.
I love that. I read in a book years ago, and it stayed with me, that sometimes in our lives something happens where time is separated into 2. to the time before that moment and the time after that moment. And it's so beautiful. Sometimes these things can happen and we're never the same after that moment. And well, Jack, I just want to thank you so much for doing this and for coming back to us, because we need you. And you have just been such a gift to me and to so many people. The impact you've had on this world is just extraordinary. So thank you for your service and for being who you are. It means the world. So
very kind
literally.
Of you. Really great to meet you.
Yes, so good to meet you, Jack. Thank you so much.
Yes. And
Lisa, I really always so appreciate our conversations. I can't say that every one of them has been like magic, and it brings a certain bit out of me that doesn't always come out. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything, and we'll connect soon.
Yes, great.
I would love that.